Hi. Hello. My name is Sally Amft Gerke, and this is my painting studio. Welcome. And I want to start out by saying thank you, Mehera, and thank you, Mayor Baba, for being always with me. And thank you, Robin Vogel, for coming to my painting studio. And a special thank you to my dear husband, Reinhard, who created this painting studio and encourages me and helps me. And thank you to all my family and friends who encourage me. So I wanted to start out by talking about when I first met Mehera. And it's just something that was so important to me. And some of my friends have heard it before, but it seems I need to begin there. So when I first met Mehera, I was at Mandalay Hall. It was 1977 in February. And it was not yet time to go from Mandalay Hall over to Mehera's porch at Meherazad. And we had not gotten the message that she was ready for us. There were just a few people. It was in between Amartisi and Baba's birthday when I was able to go. And so there weren't, and it was 77, there weren't many people. But we were supposed to be waiting until we were called over to come. But the door in the back of Mandalay Hall was open, and I went over and stood there and looked out into Mehera's garden. And across the garden, I saw Mehera. And she was walking, and she was carrying a pillow, and she was plumping the pillow, and she just looked so peaceful and serene. She was plumping the pillow and putting it on a chair, and there were one or two other ladies there, and I didn't really pay too much attention to them, but I was just, fixated on Mehera and so thrilled. Excuse me. So as soon as we heard the message that we could go across, I just stepped right out and went across and went up the steps to the veranda. But when I had been standing there was a moment where it seemed like Mehera looked over at me and sort of frowned and went, and I didn't think anything of it. So we went across and went up, and she came and very nicely greeted me. And I was carrying a sketchbook, and I had in my shoulder bag some colored pencils and a sharpener. And I'd been going around sketching everyone and everything. And I would always ask people. I had sketched Mani, I had sketched Pendu, I'd sketched a lot of the pilgrims. And I had a feeling that Baba wanted me to do that. He wanted me to carry a sketchbook and sketch while I was in India. So I said to Mehera, may I sketch you? And Mehera said, no. And she walked away from me very fast and didn't look at me. And the other ladies were looking at me, and the other pilgrims were looking at me. It was such a strong no. And then she just turned her back on me and scooted away. And I just went, oh no, I've really done something wrong, and I've stepped into her personal space. And there was a little stool like right behind me, and I just sunk down into it and put my bag and sketchbook on the floor of the porch. And I just felt so sorry and so bad, and like my ears were ringing, my eyes were out of focus, and I was just And so I just sat there for a while. Other people came. Mehera greeted them. She sat on her chair and began to talk, and I wasn't even paying attention. And this memory came back to me while I was sitting there of a time when I had been a teenager walking on a path in the woods by my grandparents' cottage in Michigan. and I would go there and sketch in the woods. And I had been walking back, and the ground was like sandy and pine straw. It was very quiet. And I stepped into a clearing, and I had been just looking at my feet and not paying attention. And suddenly, I was very close to a wild deer, just one beautiful solitary deer standing in the middle of this small clearing. I must have been downwind or something for a minute. The deer didn't know I was there, and I had really gotten too close. And the deer looked up to me and just looked so startled and shocked and upset for a minute, and just looked at me with those beautiful deer eyes and then went running away. And that was exactly the feeling that Mehera had given me. It's like this beautiful wild creature in her own habitat. And I just went right into her personal space in a really offensive way. I felt so bad. So it got to be some kind of break time. I don't know what break it was, but the ladies went into the house, but there was going to be more talk. It was a break of some kind. And other pilgrims went over to Mandalay Hall, but I just kept on sitting there and didn't even get up. Sorry, I've got a raspy throat today. So I was sitting there just spacing out, and suddenly I realized there was somebody standing very close to me, like right about there. And I looked up, and it was Mehera. And, I really should have stood up and been polite, but I was just in such a dejected mood and then so surprised that she was there that I didn't even stand up or say anything. I was just still on this little stool looking up at her. And I was aware that Mani and Mehera were somewhere over there just watching. Nobody else was around. So she looked at me and she said, "If I let you sketch me, would you tell me to hold still?" And I said, "No, Mehera. If you let me sketch you, I will not say anything to you. I would not tell you to hold still, and I would not say anything." And she said, "If I let you sketch me, would you need to sit very close to me?" And I said, "No, Mehera. If you let me sketch you, I would sit as far away as I can be." And I looked at the veranda, and way at the other end there were some stairs. And I said, I could go sit on those stairs, and I would just stay there. And she kind of looked at the stairs and looked at me and looked thoughtful again. And she said, "If I let you sketch me, would you stare at me?" And I said, "Yes, Mehera. If you let me sketch you, I would stare and stare and stare. That's how it works. I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't want you to hold still. I wouldn't move, but I would stare and stare." And she just looked at me for a long minute. And Mani and Mehera were just quiet and still. And she said, "Okay." And she went and sat in her chair, and I picked up my sketchbook and went and got up on the stairs. And I just got a page out, and she never looked at me. So I either saw her like in a 3/4 view or in a profile. So I roughed out 3 heads on the page and did just some fast sketches. And I was just totally absorbed in just studying her face. And I didn't even realize at that time how much she did not like to be stared at. But she gave me permission to stare at her. And so I just, I wasn't even paying attention to what she was saying. I was just studying her face. And her face was so fascinating to me and had all these tiny little planes that would catch the light in different, very interesting area here and here, and did as she turned. And I was just, but the sketches, I was just, they were like caricatures. They were very exaggerated. You know, it's amazing how sometimes Baba can just put a veil on you in some ways, because it never entered my mind that, of course, Mehera was going to want to see the sketch. I didn't even think about that. I was just thinking of, oh, her nose does this, her eyes do that, it's set like this. Because at that time, all I'd seen were a few small black and white images, and it was impossible to understand her face. So I was just thinking about that and not at all thinking about making nice sketches. So I just sketched as fast as I could. If her face was turned this way, I did the profile, and I did one where she was kind of frowning and one where she was kind of smiling, and then it was over and people were leaving, and I was putting my stuff up, and Mani came up to me and said, Mehera would like to see the sketch. And I went, oh. Oh, again, I had this like sinking, terrible feeling. And so I had to bring it. I took it over and showed it to her, and she frowned and she said, oh, I look old. And I said, no, Mehera, you look beautiful. You look very beautiful. These sketches are not good sketches, but because you let me sketch you, when I get back home, I'll be able to do better than I could do before. And I said, you know, I've seen some small black and white pictures of you and Baba, and they're the most beautiful images I've ever seen. But I couldn't understand your face. And now I'll be able to do better. I want to make big pictures of you and Baba with colors. And she looked at me like so intently, and she went, and she went, Jai Baba. And I laughed, you know. And so that was that. And you know, then it was a point when there weren't going to be days when we could, for a few days. And I joined a group that was going to Allura and Ajanta. And I had a shirt with a little pocket. Someone had given me a Baba card with a picture of Baba that I'd never seen before, a profile, very simple and beautiful. And I put it in that pocket. And we're riding along on the bumpy road, and I kept taking that picture out and just staring at it and thinking it was so beautiful and so subtle, and it was very high contrast, just light or dark. And I thought it would be a very difficult picture to try to sketch, and I didn't think I'd ever really try it. But I was just looking at it like you would look at a beautiful sunset and just going, oh, Baba, you're so beautiful. Bumpy road, bumpy road. So we went to Allura Ajanta and we stayed overnight and came back. And then, and in those days, only a few people could stay at Lower Mehera. It was before the Pilgrim Center. And I'd already passed that time, and I was staying in a hotel. And so I woke up at about 4 in the morning. I looked at my clock and it was 4, and I felt wide awake, and I felt like I'm going to try to make a sketch of that card. And I got my pencils and my sharpener, and I got the card and just sat up in bed. The sketchbook was big enough and firm enough that I could use it like a lap desk. And I just became absorbed in working on that sketch. And when I finished it, I was really tired, and I looked at the clock and it said 5. And I went to sleep, and when I got up in the morning and looked at the sketch, I thought, that's the best drawing of Baba I ever did. It's so much better than any drawing of Baba. So then the group went back to Mehera's side, and I showed Mehera the sketch. And she said, "When did you make that sketch?" And I said, "Last night I woke up at 4 in the morning and I sketched, and when I finished it was 5 and I went back to sleep." And she said to me, "While you were sketching Baba, I was dreaming that you were sketching Baba." And she said, "When I woke up from my dream, I looked at the clock and it was 5 o'clock. And I said to Baba, 'Yes, Baba, Sally should sketch you.'" So that was, it's still so incredible. And I still, every morning and every night, when I'm saying good morning and good night to Mehera and Baba, I say, "Wow, that really happened." And thank you. And what I felt was, since she said I could stare at her, that I feel like I'm just going to keep staring at her. And because she told Baba that I could sketch him, and I later found out he didn't like to be stared at either. But, and I think it's okay now that they're not in the body. But anyhow, it felt like she gave me permission to stare at her and to stare at Baba. And so that was just wonderful. And then, so there were some different things that I didn't sketch anymore at the other talks, but there were things that she talked about that were very important to me and that I remembered. And one thing that meant a lot to me was because I had heard some people say, "Mehera does not like the color red." And I really had felt sad about that, but I didn't say anything. And one day in one of her talks, and a Bengalwala had come, and she was looking at bracelets, and she said to the Bengalwala, "I don't want a bright red," and she picked kind of a mauve color, we would call it. So then she looked at the whole group and she said, "Sometimes people think that I don't like the color red. And sometimes people hear me say to the Bengalwala or the tailor, I don't like red. But what I mean is I don't like a bright red for me to wear. I don't think it suits me. And it's not a color that I like to wear. But I love red flowers. I love red roses. I love red birds and red sunsets, and Baba too. Baba and I, we love all the colors. And I wouldn't want anyone to think that we didn't. All the colors are part of Baba's creation. And when someone is an artist and they're making art, they should feel free to use all the colors and not think Mehera doesn't like red. So that really made me happy to hear that, because I love all the colors too. So that was great. And then another time, some Baba lover, local Baba lover in India, had sent a painting of Baba. It was about this big, and it was just his face, and it was a profile. And it was like very rough and crudely done, and kind of crazy colors. And she held it up and she said, "Now, this painting someone has sent, and when I look at it, the eyes are not the shape of Baba's eyes, and the ear is not the shape of Baba's ear, and the nose is not the shape of Baba's nose, the chin is not the shape of Baba's chin, but I see Baba there, and I like this painting, and I'm going to keep it, and I'm happy this person sent it." This painting was done with love, and Baba's eyes look compassionate. The only thing I look for in an image of Baba is his eyes. And if his eyes look compassionate, And if I feel it was done with love, I like it. She said, sometimes we get paintings from people who are very skilled artists and professional artists, and they've been trained, and portrait artists, and everything is right. You can't figure out what's wrong with it. And you say, yes, that's the shape of Baba's eyes. That's the shape of Baba's ears. Yeah, that's the shape of Baba's nose and chin. And Mani and Meru and I will look at it and we'll say, I don't know, Baba's not there. And we don't keep it. We just thank the person and pass it on. But if the eyes look cold and it doesn't look like it was done with love, we don't feel that Baba's there. So that really meant a lot to me too, because I never had confidence in my drawing ability and my ability to get likenesses, and yet Mehera and Baba were so beautiful I couldn't resist trying, but I never really felt confident about it, so happy to hear that. And the other thing that I really liked hearing Mehera talk about was, so like a lot of the pilgrims wanted her to talk about her time with Baba, but sometimes she would tell these little stories from her childhood. And I really enjoyed that. And she would say each time, this is a story that I would tell Baba. And sometimes when we'd be sitting out on the veranda in the evening, Baba would say, tell us that story about when you rode on the pony so fast and you never got in trouble for it. And he'd chuckle. Or tell us about the story when you rode on the elephant. So she had all these little stories, and she really had a very picturesque and unusual childhood. So, you know, her father was the head force ranger and head civil engineer for what was then called the Northwest, what was it, Frontier, I think. It was part of the British Raj. And all the different provinces in India, the person who had that position was British, except in this northwest area, which was near Afghanistan and very wild and desert and mountains and a dangerous area with dangerous tribal people, and none of the British people wanted to do it. And so Jahangir had that position. It was a very high position. So she just had such a fascinating childhood traveling. That whole area later became the country of Pakistan. So that was, she was born in Sukkur and grew up there. So I was just so interested in her stories. And later on, we got the books that had been made from people recording her, the Fenster book and Naushawant Answer's book, and where these stories were written out too. And for years and years, I would think someone should make a nice little children's book from those stories. And Mehera had also said that she really liked children's picture books, and I always did too. So that would be kind of in the back of my mind for 50, 55 years, that someone should do that. And I thought, well, of course, lots of people will. Over the years, many people will. So that was, at that time when I met Mehera, I was 30 and she was 70. And now here we are in my studio, and I'm going to have Robin show you, and I'm giving her a stick with a little slideshow, that I have made big, colorful paintings of Mehera and Baba, you know, and always feel Mehera and Baba are with me and helping me to do that. And so this studio, my husband Reinhardt put together for me, and we've been together now for 19 years. And we met at the Mehera Spiritual Center. At the time that we met, we were both single, and you know, we were about 60, and we were both on our own and didn't think we wanted to be with anyone. And he had been married twice before, and he had 2 grown-up sons. And I had been married 3 times before, And I had two grown-up sons and two grown-up daughters and some grandchildren. And I had been through, we'd both been through two divorces, and I had also been through having my third husband commit suicide. And so we both had had, some painful stuff. But I'd see him from time to time. He was from Germany, and sometimes whenever he would visit Myrtle Beach, he would come to the center. Sometimes he'd be staying on the center, and then he'd be off to Germany or somewhere. And we would talk a little bit. So, and then he'd be gone again. And I think a few years went by that, kind of like that. And then I was living at that time across the street from the Baba Center at the Briarcliff West condos. And so one evening I had gone shopping at that Walmart near the center. And like usually if I was going to go to a Friday or Saturday night meeting, I would try to look nice, and put on some clean clothes and comb my hair and try to look nice. But I'd had a busy day, and I was just wearing like sweatpants and a sweatshirt and my hair pulled back and no makeup. It was just not going to go to the center that evening. And going home from Walmart, I noticed that the sky was really bright and clear, and there was a full moon. And I thought, oh, I haven't been on the center when there's a bright full moon in a long time. And I don't even have to go to the meeting. I could just go in and go by the boathouse and look at the moonlight. So I did that. I pulled in and went and saw the moonlight. And then I was going to leave, and I was passing the meeting hall, and the meeting was still going on. I thought, well, I can just go in that back door by the bathroom and just stay in the back where it's dark, and no one will see that I look so bedraggled. So I did that, and then the lights went up, and across the room I saw Reinhardt, and I just stood up and just walked right up to him and said, hi. And he went, oh, hello, And it happened that the week before I had taken down a show of paintings. I had had an exhibit of some of my paintings at the meeting place, but it was down. And I said, oh, I just had an exhibit of paintings, and I would have liked for you to see them. And but I live right across the street. Would you like to come to my apartment and see my paintings? And he said, yes. So that's how we began. And then, but he was on his way to Germany. He was thinking about moving to Germany for good. But he said to me, well, I'm definitely going to be in Germany for a while, but while I'm there, would it be all right if I write to you? And I said yes. And he began to send me a postcard every day. And every day a different postcard. Some were beautiful, some were artistic, some were travel, some were cartoons, all different things. And just a little message every day. And then occasionally he'd say, well, could I call you? And it was unusual in those days, but he had some kind of Skype or something, because he had relatives in America and in Germany. He could call long distance, which most people didn't have. So occasionally he would call me. And then at one point while he was away, I was going to be up in Chicago visiting my father, who was the artist Robert Amft. And so my mother had passed on, but I would try to go visit my father. When I was on summer break, I was a teacher. So I was up visiting my father, and Reinhardt called, and somehow he realized who my father was, and I gave him my father's name, and my father was right in the room with me, and Reinhardt said, oh, your father is really a very famous artist. And my father was so happy to hear that. He went, oh, very astute young man here. And he said, your father won the Paris Biennial art exhibit, and I don't even remember what year it was, but he knew. And we didn't even know that it had been in German newspapers. We knew it had been in the French newspapers and in some of the American newspapers, that he had, my father would enter anything he could enter, and he had entered a painting, and it was a large spray painting of the Mona Lisa face with a cigarette dangling out of her mouth. And Reinhardt loved it and remembered it and said, wow, so that started a beautiful friendship between Reinhardt and my father that went on, and towards the end of my father's life, I was still teaching, and Reinhardt took care of my father, and Reinhardt and his son made a website for my father that's still going on. So I'm going to take a little break now, and my kids and their families are so supportive of me, and it is really wonderful to have your kids be grown up and be, wanting to help you. Is very sweet, and they're great. And so Reinhardt and I started getting to be friends with my aunt and Richard Ward, and we enjoy getting together with them. And Richard and Reinhardt are both interested in so many things, and they both are interested in politics, and they're interested in all kinds of things that are on the educational channel and the educational radio and science and so many things, philosophy. And so the first time that we went out to eat together, I sat across from my aunt, and Reinhardt sat across from Richard, and they both just started diddle 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 diddle. And my aunt and I were like talking about the flowers and talking about Baba and talking about art. And then at one point, my aunt leaned forward and she said, "I'm so glad Richard has someone to talk to." So we get together now and then, and the boys have always so much stuff, and we just da-da-da-da-da. But during that period of time, they were self-publishing books, and I didn't even know anyone that was doing that. And I had never thought of trying to do that. Over the years, there were a few times when I had attempted to write and illustrate children's books. Not Baba ones, but just other children's books. And I was an art teacher at Myrtle Beach Primary School, and always interested in little kids. I was a big sister, I was a babysitter, I was a mom, a grandma, a teacher, loved children's books. And I had tried at times, but I never found a publisher that was at all encouraging, and I just got discouraged about it. And then even in talking to people, from Shariar about some ideas, they said, well, Shariar Press is very busy with big things, and they're not really doing children's books. So, I started talking to Reinhardt and going, wow, my aunt and Richard felt that Baba wanted them to write this book, and they wrote it, and they self-published it. And I think they've done like over 20 books, and they're all on Amazon. And, they would talk to us about it, and, and the ideas they got, and the feeling that, Baba wanted them to do it, and they would do it. And so I started saying to Reinhardt, well, maybe I could do it, and maybe we could afford it. And it's like with everything where I had an idea, like I want to frame a painting, I want to make some prints. And Reinhardt would always say, yeah, we can do that, let's do it. And he never was negative and about spending money on something like that, and always encouraging. So he said, sure, yeah, we can do that, just, And then my aunt and Richard said, we'll help you if you want to try. And they were very encouraging. And so then our dear friend Sharon Black, who's recently passed on, she didn't consider herself a Baba lover, but she loved Jesus. And she was a dear friend, and she was very disabled, and she would tell me that she would pray for me. So when she knew I was writing the Little Mehera book, she said, I'm going to pray for you that you can do it and you can finish it. And I really did feel that her prayers did help, and so I began working on it. But around that time, uh, an age-onset eye condition that I have began to progress and get worse. So, but I want to say it's so confusing because there's really like two different things that your optometrist might call macular degeneration. And Reinhardt and I, started watching different things on the internet, and it's about 80% of people our age might get like an early stage of dry macular degeneration with no geographical atrophy. And that's fine. If you get that, all you need is good reading glasses and a good reading light. So not many people get it where it starts progressing and you start losing some of your central vision. So, and then if that does happen and then you need eye injections, it is worthwhile to get the eye injections. It sounds so creepy, and I know people that just said no, they wouldn't do it, but I'm sure everyone has had eye drops put in their eye, and it's not any worse than that. They put a little drop in, it's cool and nice, your eye is numb. The doctor says, look over this way, and he comes in that way, and you don't even feel it. And so I've been doing that for about 4 years, and if I were not doing that, I'd probably be totally blind by now. And but I haven't lost any peripheral vision, and it's just fabulous to have the peripheral vision. It's just a little weird because, like, if I'm sitting in a room, it feels like I can see everything except whatever I'm looking at. Right now, the camera's in a blue cloud. Now, I sort of think the camera's clear somewhere over there, and that painting is in a blue cloud. No, the ceiling is in a blue cloud. I can't escape it. And it's it's a neurological thing. My eyes see everything, but the message doesn't get to the brain. So Reinhardt was helping me and being encouraging, supporting, and he said, this is my second book here now, but at first I had little Mehera was here. I wanted to have it so I could see all the pages at once and work on them all at once and progress like that. So he'd set it up like that, and I had really good glasses from the eye doctor, and I have his other glasses that magnify and some good lights. And I was going along, and the way I work, is first the backgrounds and then the shapes, and then the last part is putting on the teeny tiny details, which has always been my favorite part. And so I was working along on the little Mehera book, and up here in my studio, Reinhardt was downstairs in his cave. And when I would try to do it, it was a picture where their father had given the two little girls some dolls. And the faces on the dolls were tiny. And I wanted to put some little eyelashes and lipstick on the dolls. And I just couldn't really see when the tip of my teeny tiny brush was touching the painting. And I went downstairs to Reinhardt, and I had tears in my eyes, and I said, Reinhardt, my macular degeneration has gotten worse, and I just can't do the tight focus anymore, and I'm not going to be able to finish Little Mehera. And he said, well, we'll see what we can do. And the next day, FedEx or UPS or somebody like that was at the door with this. He said, try this. This is a thing that they use in beauty parlors when they want to do your eyebrows. And see if I can get it going now. Is it plugged in? You have to see this. It's so amazing. So it's got this part here. You have to leave it closed because it's so magnifying that if the sun shone through it, you might start a fire. So you have to close it up when you're not using it because it's really a big magnifier. And so I would, I'd sit in this chair and I'd bring the easel over, and this has these LED lights, and you could look, And I could see the dolls' faces, and I could see my hand coming in, and if I went very slowly and carefully, I could finish the paintings. So that was just so amazing, and I was so happy. And we finished Little Mehera and got it printed. We went to get it printed. So but one thing I wanted to do, this is the Little Mehera book here. So I really had it in mind that I wanted to have these borders with a color. And I didn't even know what you call it. But what each picture has is it has a little skin line border of a pretty color, and then a different color that goes right off the page. And it always bothers me when pictures disappear into the middle crease here, so I thought if I do this, that won't happen. And I thought it made the pictures look better to have that. And they call it margin fill, like you're filling up the margin. And so my aunt Richard had said that they were going to help me with the book, and they did help a lot in many ways. But then one day they came over here and came in and looked at what I was doing, and I explained what I wanted to do, and they went, "Oh, you're Apple Mac. We're HP. We don't know how to do that on an Apple Mac." So I just called up Sherry, our press, and made an appointment to go in and talk to them. And they said, you know, I could hire the design team to do that. And Reinhardt said, yeah, we can do that. We can hire their design team. And they gave us an estimate. And so we did for this book. The Sherry Art Press design team, you know, did the design on the cover and did those margin fills, you know, and I chose the colors. So that was all fine, and it was there and it sold, and so then I was, you know, just relieved. Wow, I managed to live to finish that book, and you know, before my eyes went too far bad. But so a thing that happens with me when I'm drawing anything, like if I'm drawing a rose, I'm saying, "What a beautiful rose you are." And if I was drawing Mehera's puppy dog, I'd say, "What a cute little puppy dog you are." And I'd sort of have like a little conversation. I've just always done that. And when I was teaching art to little kids, a lot of kids do that. They'd be kind of going, "Oh, here comes this little boy. Hi, little boy." And that's how I work. So when I'm drawing Baba, I'm saying, "Oh, Baba, you're so beautiful." And when I'm drawing Mehera, I'm saying, "Oh, Mehera, isn't Baba beautiful?" And so, of course, with Mehera and Baba, you start doing a little conversation, and they're there. You know, they're like, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. So and when I was doing Little Mehera, I was always talking to this picture, which I still do talk to. If you can see it, it'll blow up. And so I'd go, "Well, Mehera this, and well, Mehera that." And so, you know, I was saying, "Look, Mehera, Little Mehera is a book." And Mehera said, "Uh-huh, now do Little Mehrog." And I went, "Well, no, Little Mehera's a book, and we're done, and my eyes are getting bad, and I'm pretty old here." And she went, "Yeah, you did that, now do Little Mehrog." I was going, no, I can't do Little Mehera. And, you know, with Mehera, I had heard her tell the stories were written in books. And with Baba, you know, when people would ask him, he would say, "I had a normal, happy childhood." And the books about Baba as a child were like an older kid, you know, like elementary. I'm primary. I'm like pre-K and K. And, but I did find in one of the Little Mehera books that Mehera had asked Baba's mother, Mommy Shireen, you know, what was Baba like as a baby, you know? And so she was saying, "Well, all babies are cute, and Baba was so beautiful. He must have been," it's like that song, "You must have been a beautiful baby." So and Shireen said, "Yes, he was. He was very beautiful and mischievous, and he had beautiful curly hair that had a lot of highlights in it when the sun shone, and she never wanted to cut it, and she didn't cut it for years." And so, and she told a few little stories. And so I felt like Mary was going, okay, there you go. Just, it'll be just the same as doing the little Mehera book. You just do the same thing, and just do that, and then it'll be just the same. So I went, okay, and said to Reinhardt, I'm gonna do another little book, and I need to order about 25 18 by 24 canvases and a few big canvases. And he said, okay, yeah, let's do that. And got more paint and started in doing it. And just like with the little Mehera book, as I was working, my eyesight was getting worser and worser and worser. And so I was really getting to where I was just saying to Mehera and Baba, I have to be able to see something. So, like, my experience with this eye thing was like the left eye is gone as far as focus. Both eyes have great peripheral vision. The left eye has no ability to focus. And the right eye is almost there now. And for a while, I had these little blind spots, and now I have little I can see for a second spots. So if I'm just sitting very patiently, I might just for a second get a little glimpse of like Baba's eye or Baba's mouth, but by the time I can put my hand to the painting, it's gone. So I have to kind of go, okay, it's there, I'm going to get it there. And so I have to paint with a wet cloth in one hand. With acrylic, it's a plastic paint, it dries fast. And so I'll, do a mark and pull it, and then I'll look at it this way and that way, and probably have to wipe it off and try again. And so about 3 years ago, I had to give up driving the car. I probably should have given up sooner. So for a while, I had these little tiny blind spots. My blind spots are not dark. They're way too bright and sparkly. This area where I'm having deterioration is not able to send pain signals, but it is able to flash lights in my face. So it's just all these little flashing lights all the time whirling and swirling around. It's called distracted vision. Having been a primary school teacher, pretty good with distractions, but it's like my eyesight has become like kindergarten kids the day after Halloween. Whoa, too much sugar, keep them moving. And, whoa. So I did have to stop driving. It came to a point where a car was coming towards me and it disappeared, and then it was there. And then on that same trip, I almost hit a dog. There was a dog in the road and I didn't see it. And it's like the dog's face was there when I drove by, and it looked very alarmed, and I would never come that close to a dog. And so I told Reinhardt, I better stop driving. He was really glad. He was becoming aware of how little I could see, and he's going, are you sure you should still be driving? But the optometrist had said in South Carolina, you only have to have one good eye. And so I stopped driving. And in the car, I had some CDs of some of my favorite music, and some was Baba stuff. I had like David Matkey's East-West Gathering, and some Pamela Rubinstein and Bobby Bernstein, and then I had all different other things, all different kinds of songs that I liked. But it's like on these discs where when I would be driving, you would put in a disc and you knew which song was going to be next. So then Reinhardt went and got me this speaker and got me this nice speaker and put the songs onto my iPhone, and in a thing where it does this shuffle. I really like the shuffle because you don't know what's going to be next, and I have so many songs on there. And so the shuffle would be going, and it's one of these touching Baba things that he would really at times communicate with me through the shuffle and let me know that he's there. So sometimes I would be working on Little Merog, and I would just get to like, I'm trying to look at it this way, I'm shining this light, I'm trying this magnifier, I'm trying that magnifier, and and just getting discouraged. And then on the music would come, dream the impossible dream, fight the unbearable foe. The man from La Mancha. And I'd go, okay, Bobby, you're right. Yeah, I'm going to dream the impossible dream. I'm not going to give up. Even if I fail, I've got to try. And so that would work for a while. And then other times I'd get to a spot where I'd just be like getting weepy and just going, I can't do this. And Mehera said I should do it, but it's not the same. And then would come on this really sweet song of going, have a little faith in me, darling. I go, all right, Bobby, you're so nice. Okay, let's have a cup of tea and try again. But I found when I was really at my rope's end and most desperate, then he would put on Pam Rubinstein singing, the Avatar is playing the guitar. I go, oh yeah, the Avatar is making these paintings. Okay, make these paintings. They're not going to be as good as I want them to be. It was a whole other thing that I began to realize at that point. So like when I was a teacher, I sometimes had playground duty, and I was also an art teacher, for little kids. And I had a memory of being on the playground with a little kindergarten boy. And there was just dirt on the ground, and he had a stick. And he was standing with his stick, and he drew a circle in the mud and drew like rays coming out of it. And it was a bright, sunshiny day, and the clear, and the sun was shining down on us. And he said, look, Mrs. Gerke, look, I drew the sun. And I said, yeah, you did, you drew the sun. And he said, I love the sun. And he ran off to play. And I realized at that moment that that's what all my art is. Baba made the Grand Canyon. Baba made the sun. Baba's brighter than the sun. And everything I do can only be like a child scratching in the mud with a stick. And I'm going to Baba and Mehera and saying, look, I drew you. And they're going, yeah, that's nice. Okay, good. And it's like, for so many years, I was very critical of my own work and very perfectionist and really wanted it to be good. And now I'm just doing what I can. And it's not really as good by my idea as I did a few years ago. But Baba and Mehera seem happy that I'm trying, and it's just for me a very different concept. And I think it's really true with everything we do, and Baba said, he's not judging the results, but it's hard to realize it. But so, now I'm just doing what I can. So I just wanted to tell you about a dream I had of Mehera. Okay, yeah. So I felt like it was important in Little Mehera to put in this quote where Baba, I can't read it anymore, but no, I can't read it. But I'll just tell you how I remember. It was something where he says he loves animals for they're part of his creation, but he loves children more. And whenever children are playing happily, he's with them and he's playing with them and he as their happy playmate, something like that. And he said a few things like that about children and when they're playing and when they're happy. And so one night I had a dream that I was in the kitchen at Mehersad, and I was standing by the door to the outside, and I could see through the door to the dining room, and Mehera and the other ladies were sitting around having tea, and they didn't notice me. And I was just for a moment going, wow, here I am. I'm in Mehersad's kitchen, and there's Mehera and the other women having tea. And Mehera looked over and saw me and smiled, and she stood up and walked over, and she came very close to me. And she did this sweet little thing that when I was working on the Little Mehera book, I noticed that she did, and I saw her do it once with Meru, and I saw her mother do it in pictures. And it's like, instead of, when someone's talking to her, sometimes instead of just turning and looking at them, she would do this thing where she would kind of like tilt her head and look at you like that. And so she did that. She came close to me and she kind of tilted her head and looked at me and smiled. And then she got close and she whispered and she said, "Meet me in the playground later." And I said, "Meet you in the playground, Mehera?" And she said, "Yes." And she scurried away and went back out there, and I woke up. But I've really been thinking about that too, because so Mehera says she's always with Baba wherever he is. And Baba says when Mehera's happy, Baba's happy. And Baba says when children are happy playing, he's playing with them. And so then Mehera's, I was thinking, well, yeah, so Mehera's in the playground with Baba when kids are playing. So I think in the future, I hope in the future and in the new humanity, Baba centers will always have nice, safe playgrounds and nice places for children to have their happy play. And another thing I've thought, since spending a lot of time with little kids, is that grown-ups are not having enough fun. And it's perplexing to little kids. They don't know why grown-ups are so serious. Take a break and have some fun. So, okay, I love you. Jai Baba.